Ethan had grown used to silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind that allowed the mind to rest but the brittle quiet of a relationship stretched thin. His boyfriend, Daniel, had become more of a ghost in recent months, moving through their shared apartment with clipped conversations and eyes that rarely lingered. Work had swallowed him whole, and though Ethan respected ambition, he longed for something softer: laughter at dinner, a touch on the shoulder, a glance that meant more than routine. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon, Ethan ducked into a crowded cafe to escape a sudden downpour. He shook off his umbrella, ordered a black coffee, and searched for a seat. His gaze fell on a familiar figure across the room. At first, he hesitated, thinking memory was playing tricks, but then the man looked up, and recognition hit with unexpected force. "Liam?" Ethan's voice carried across the clatter of dishes. The man broke into a grin, the same disarming smile Ethan remembered from university. They hadn't seen each other in years, yet in that instant, the gap of time seemed to vanish. "Ethan. I can't believe this," Liam said, standing to embrace him. They found a quiet corner and began to talk, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. Liam spoke of his job, of travels that had taken him across Europe, of a recent decision to return to the city. He mentioned, almost offhand, that he was between apartments and staying temporarily in a short-term rental. Ethan, listening with genuine interest, felt something he hadn't felt in months: warmth. Their laughter drew curious glances from other tables. Ethan realized how much he had missed this, being seen, being heard. Daniel rarely asked about his day anymore, and when he did, his attention was already drifting toward his phone. With Liam, every word seemed to matter. When the cafe closed, the rain had subsided, leaving the streets washed clean. They stepped outside, the air carrying the faint scent of wet pavement. Ethan hesitated, then spoke before he could overthink. "You know, if you're still figuring out a place to stay, you're welcome to crash at mine. Just until you get settled." The offer hung between them, casual on the surface but pulsing with unspoken undercurrents. Ethan wasn't sure why he had said it. Perhaps it was kindness. Perhaps it was loneliness disguised as generosity. Liam tilted his head, studying him. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Ethan replied too quickly. "Honestly, it would be good to have some company around." The words slipped out before he could call them back. He thought of Daniel, likely buried in spreadsheets or stuck in another late-night meeting. Daniel would hardly notice. The thought stung, but it also made Ethan feel strangely liberated. They walked together toward the subway, continuing their conversation. Liam's easy humor softened the edges of Ethan's mood. At the platform, Liam agreed. "All right, just for a few days. But only if you promise not to regret it." Ethan smiled, though a flicker of unease passed through him. No regrets. As they parted that night, Ethan carried home more than just the memory of an old friend. He carried a stirring of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: anticipation. At home, the apartment was dark, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had texted earlier, saying he'd be late again. Ethan read the message, sighed, and set his phone aside. For once, he didn't dwell on the loneliness. Instead, he thought about Liam's smile, the spark in his voice, the comfort of being understood without explanation. That he told himself it was harmless, just a friend staying over, just a gesture of kindness. But as he lay in bed that night, listening to the hollow quiet of the apartment, Ethan couldn't ignore the truth. His invitation had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere hungry, and soon, Liam would walk through that door. The following evening, Ethan tidied the apartment with a focus he hadn't felt in months. He smoothed the couch cushions, rearranged the books on the coffee table, even lit a candle he had almost forgotten in the back of the cupboard. The flame flickered against the dim walls, softening the edges of the silence. He told himself it was simple courtesy, but inside he knew he wanted Liam to feel welcome, wanted him to notice the care. When the knock finally came, Ethan's pulse quickened. Liam stood at the door with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his hair damp from the evening drizzle. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, stepping inside. "You're right on time," Ethan replied, surprised at the steadiness of his own voice. The first hour unfolded easily. They shared takeout on the couch, trading stories that stretched across the years since they had last seen each other. Liam spoke of hiking in the Alps, of learning to cook in a cramped kitchen in Barcelona, of heartbreaks and recoveries that had shaped him. Ethan found himself listening intently, absorbing every detail as though it were a lifeline that he spoke, too, though more cautiously. He mentioned Daniel, describing him in clipped sentences that avoided the truth, the distance, the growing void. Liam didn't press, but his silence carried understanding, the kind that comes without judgment. Later, they opened a bottle of wine Ethan had been saving for a special occasion. The cork popped, the glasses clinked, and the atmosphere softened. The candle's glow painted Liam's features in warm tones, highlighting the curve of his smile, the light in his eyes. They laughed over old memories, late-night study sessions, disastrous attempts at cooking in their dorm kitchen, the time they nearly missed an exam because they had stayed up talking until dawn. Each memory pulled them closer to the people they once were, and to something Ethan had almost forgotten, intimacy built on presence, not obligation. As the night deepened, their voices lowered, as though the quiet demanded something more personal. Liam shifted in his seat, looking at Ethan with a seriousness that cut through the levity. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course," Ethan said, though his chest tightened. "I used to have feelings for you. Back then, in school. I never said anything, I didn't want to ruin what we had. But I always wondered if you ever felt it too." The words landed softly yet heavily, reverberating in the stillness. Ethan's first instinct was to deny, to push away the thought. But honesty tugged at him, and before he could stop himself, he answered with quiet candor, "Maybe I did. But the timing was never right." And then life just went on. Their eyes held for a long moment. The candle flickered, shadows bending around them. Ethan felt the space between them shrink, though neither had moved. Inside, a battle raged. He thought of Daniel, his partner, his commitment, the years they had built together. Yet when he imagined Daniel, he saw not warmth but absence, not closeness but neglect. Then he looked at Liam, whose presence filled the room with a kind of light Ethan had forgotten could exist. Liam reached out, brushing his fingers against Ethan's hand. The touch was tentative, hesitant, but it lingered. Ethan's breath caught. He could have pulled away, could have framed it as a slip, a mistake. Instead, he stayed still, allowing the contact to hold. The silence between them grew louder than words. Ethan felt the line he had drawn for years, the line of loyalty, of restraint, begin to blur. He knew the consequences, knew the betrayal implicit in every second of hesitation, and yet he couldn't deny the pull. At last, Liam withdrew his hand, almost reluctantly. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed uncertainty. "I don't want to cross a line you'll regret." Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. "It's already crossed," he admitted softly. The words hung between them, fragile and irreversible. Neither spoke after that. They sat in the quiet, the weight of unspoken possibilities pressing down. Ethan's heart raced, not with fear but with a dangerous anticipation. As the night edged toward midnight, Ethan rose, clearing the empty glasses. He told himself he needed time to think, that nothing irreversible had yet occurred. But as he returned to the living room, Liam's gaze met his, and Ethan knew the decision was already forming in his heart. The evening ended without confession, without closure. But Ethan carried the knowledge that the boundary had shifted, and tomorrow would demand answers. Ethan awoke the next morning with a heaviness that was not entirely exhaustion. The faint light of dawn seeped through the blinds, painting the room in pale gray. He lay still for a long moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of the apartment, aware that Liam was asleep in the guest room. The night before had not ended in declarations or confessions, but the silence between them had been louder than any act. A truth had been acknowledged, and it lingered now like a shadow across the morning. He rose quietly, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from his mug. The guilt crept in first, sharp and undeniable. He was still in a relationship with Daniel. Still bound by years of shared history, by promises once made with conviction. And yet, what he felt for Liam, rekindled in a matter of hours, made him question whether those promises had already been broken long before last night. His phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, late meetings all day. Don't wait for me for dinner. Short, detached, efficient. Ethan stared at the screen, a hollow ache spreading through his chest. For years, he had told himself that Daniel's absence was temporary, a phase dictated by career ambition. But now, juxtaposed against Liam's presence, the truth was clear. Daniel had left long ago in everything but name. A movement at the doorway drew Ethan's gaze. Liam appeared, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," he said softly, almost cautiously, as though measuring the weight of the word. "Morning," Ethan replied, managing a small smile. They sat together, sipping coffee in quiet. The air between them carried both comfort and unease. Finally, Liam spoke. "I don't want to complicate your life. Last night, what we said, what we felt, it doesn't have to mean more than it did." Ethan searched his face, finding no trace of regret. Instead, there was a steadiness, a willingness to accept whatever truth Ethan chose. "But it does mean more," Ethan said at last. "It means I can't keep pretending everything with Daniel is fine. It hasn't been for a long time." The admission loosened something inside him, though it also deepened his guilt. He expected to feel crushed by the weight of betrayal, but instead, he felt clarity. It wasn't that Liam had destroyed anything, it was that Liam had illuminated what was already broken. They spent the day together in simple ways, cooking breakfast, sharing stories, sitting side by side on the couch while the city moved busily outside the windows. Each moment felt fragile, fleeting, as though borrowed from a life that wasn't theirs to claim. Ethan's thoughts flickered constantly between the present warmth and the inevitable reckoning to come. By evening, as the sky burned orange, Ethan walked Liam to the door. Neither wanted to speak the obvious, but the silence demanded honesty. Liam set down his bag, meeting Ethan's eyes. "I care about you. I always have. But I don't want to be the reason you end something important. You need to decide what you want, not for me, but for yourself." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I know. And that's what scares me." Liam smiled faintly, brushing Ethan's arm with a touch that was both tender and restrained. "You'll figure it out. Just don't lose yourself in the process." With that, he left, his footsteps fading down the hall. The apartment felt impossibly still after his departure. Ethan stood for a long time at the door, unsure whether he had just let go of something temporary or something vital. When he finally turned back inside, the silence pressed against him, heavier than before. He checked his phone again, no new messages from Daniel. The absence was louder than any confrontation. For the first time, Ethan considered that the betrayal was not last night's silence with Liam but the years of silence that had stretched between himself and Daniel. He poured another glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let the thought settle. Choices lay ahead, difficult, messy, unavoidable. But beneath the guilt, beneath the fear, there was also relief. He had glimpsed what it felt like to be seen, to be wanted, to be alive again. The candle from the night before had burned low, a stub of wax on the table. Ethan stared at it, the faint curl of smoke still rising, and wondered if it was the end of something or the beginning. Sometimes betrayal wasn't the act itself. Sometimes betrayal was the silence that came long before, and for the first time in years, Ethan was ready to listen.